Hello, everyone. We should be live. I am your host, Deacon Adam Roberts, and
And
this is my co-host.
Father Matthew Howell.
And this is a series uh, that we've been doing over the last several days. And Father Matthew, I'm glad you can join me today. I know your schedule's been kind of crazy. We've had a lot of last-minute interviews scheduled on racial reconciliation, and our guest today is Mother Katherine. And this was last minute, so I appreciate you being available. And as always, we're going to begin with a prayer.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O Lord Jesus Christ, our God, you came among your disciples and gave them peace. So also come among us and give us peace, and give us oneness of mind, and open our hearts that we may do your will in all things, that we may love our brothers and sisters as you have loved us. For you are holy always, now, and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen.
Amen. So once again, I said this is a series of talks on racial reconciliation that began on Monday that we've been hosting at the Antiochian Department of Missions and Evangelism page on Facebook. Monday, we began with an interview with Father Paul Abernathy, who really helped set the stage and explain everything, because there's a lot of confusion on what's happening and why it's happening. And for those who have been out of sight, out of mind, trying to gather reliable information. And so Father Paul Abernathy really helped set the stage for that. On Tuesday, we continued the conversation with Deacon Jonathan Rivas, who has years of experience at reconciliation services in Kansas City. In the past year, he has moved on to do some social work with another organization, but he shared with his experience on racial reconciliation and gave some really great information. Then on Wednesday, we had an interview with Father James Hamrick, who is a former law enforcement officer. He was with the University of Maryland for 25 years and had experience at 13 different riots at College Park. And he shared his perspective on what he's seen in terms of police brutality and gave some encouraging words on what we should expect from our law enforcement, which was helpful to have some proper expectations. And we took a break yesterday, and now we're here with Mother Katherine.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. So do you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, briefly. I come from a family with a long history in trying to improve the lives of people of color. My father, grandfather, and great-grandfather are all Episcopal clergymen. My father was one in Manhattan in St. Philip's Episcopal Church, which was the first Black Episcopal congregation. And he was very much involved in trying to help African Americans get affordable housing at a time when, in the 50s, when none of the mainstream banks would give us homeowner loans. So he co-founded Carver Federal Savings and Loan, which still exists to this day. And when homeowner loans to Black people worked out successfully, then the mainstream banks began to open and give us loans as well as creating decent and affordable housing in Manhattan. So that's the family that I come from that's been part of the struggle for a long time. I have correspondence between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and my grandmother when he was inviting her to come to the church and give a talk to the ladies' organization, which she had to decline, but that's the stage that I stepped into. I've been an Orthodox nun since '88. I have a small community in Indianapolis where there's a core group of 3 of us, although the numbers fluctuate. And there I practice iconography as I'm able to. I'm a mental health counselor. I'm actually doing this event from my office. And that's about it.
I have a quick question, and forgive my faulty memory if I have this completely wrong. It's quite possible. But I seem to remember, was it that Episcopal church that you just mentioned that St. Nikolai of Zicha visited? Do you, is there
100%.
is there any kind of a story around that, or just, I got nervous mentioning it because I'm like, I'm going to mess this up, but
No, 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 you're absolutely right. And our community published A Life and Service of St. Nikolai Velimirovich, which is available online. And it mentions that and has a photograph of St. Philip's in there. So he came to the United States in the 1920s on a speaking tour that included many cities, Manhattan among them, spoke at Columbia University, and he spoke to a group of about 1,500 African Americans there at St. Philip's Church, received with a standing ovation.
and was that some way directly related to you becoming Orthodox, or is it unrelated?
Of course, he prayed. He prayed.
He prayed.
I absolutely credit him for my being in the Serbian church.
Wow, that's a beautiful
I mean, for
story.
me to be in the Orthodox church at all is a miracle, but for me to be in the Serbian church, I absolutely attribute to his prayers.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. My supervisor, Father John Finley, who is the chairman of the Department of Missions Evangelism, has introduced me to his writings, his beautiful writings, and so I'm very thankful. So, well, thank you for that. Well, I think the first thing I want to mention is that part of my interest in talking to you, besides being recommended, and I know your affiliation with, let's start with the name change announcement.
Yes.
I would like to give you that honor, if you don't mind.
Yes, the Brotherhood of St. Moses the Black is now being called the Fellowship of St. Moses the Black. At the time that we were formed in the 1990s, it was clear that Brotherhood included men and women, but language changes over time, and we wanted to be more explicit that this is definitely embracing everyone.
Okay, and there's a little bit of echo. Is that me coming through your speakers, Mother Katherine, do you think?
I don't know. I don't hear it, so.
Maybe. Okay. Maybe not. It might be something else.
I can move the microphone and see if that made a difference, but I really don't know.
It might be okay. It might have been some gremlin in our system.
Oh wait, yeah. Gremlins love getting in technology, so we'll.
I don't hear it. I don't hear it right now, so I think it's
wonderful.
Okay.
Well, I have been trying to figure out what we could do at our parish for several months after I visited the conference back in Atlanta several months ago. And I reached out to Father Turbo Qualls, who is the Dean of Chapters, and he said you should start with a book study at your church. And the book that you should start with is a book that you wrote, Race, Identity, and Reconciliation. So I've already ordered the book. There it is. And I appreciated the practical step of that. There's so many people who want to do something. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of confusion on what we should do, how should we do it, who do we connect with. And as Orthodox Christians, I'm so thankful for your leadership, so many of the others associated with the Fellowship of St. Moses the Black. So that's where we are. I if you don't mind, I think maybe we should talk about the book.
Okay. So let's start with the cover.
Okay.
The cover is a monument in Indianapolis that's a pleasant walk from the monastery. And this memorializes the place that Ted Kennedy spoke on the night that Martin Luther King was shot and kept Indianapolis from going up in flames. So we have a history of racial reconciliation in Indianapolis, and it's a good place to live. It's a very good place to live. My goal in the book was to really promote dialogue, to both authentically speak about history and experience from the African American experience, and not to alienate the most conservative, rural or suburban white people in the Orthodox Church. And I heard from a gentleman who, in the Serbian church, who belongs to a county he says is so conservative they don't even run Democratic candidates. At any rate, he loved the book, his wife loved the book, they recommended it to other people, so I'm hopeful, therefore, that I have accomplished that goal of both being authentic and not alienating people.
I appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to it. I've already there was a little bit of a preview online that I was able to glance at, and I was thankful. I've ordered my copy, for those who are wondering. It's always in stock at Amazon, which is nice. So you don't have to worry about it being out of stock. It's available, and we will be starting our book study. I'm not sure when. I'm coordinating with another deacon at our church to schedule that and make sure people have time to order the book and arrive. And we're probably going to be doing, not ideal, but I think we're going to be doing it online, virtually, at this time with everything that's happening.
Sure.
And I know, Father Matthew, you've expressed interest in that, doing a book study as well.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I represent a demographic that we don't know how to get involved. And these are issues that our people face. We have people in our church who face these issues of discrimination in their lives. But for the most part, a large majority of my people are sheltered from it or blind to it in some way. It's just not in our face. We don't have riots coming up to the door of our church. So the legitimate, real question is, how do we authentically get involved? How do we express support in a real way that makes sense for us? And so, at least with the book study, it's something that I can do. It's something that we can invite people into. And as I heard Father Turbo explain it, it's a way to begin the interior change of the heart before we start the social organizational change from the church moving out towards a community.
Exactly. Wonderful goal. I'm so happy that both of you are engaged in that. That warms my heart.
Well, I don't know how to explain how excited I am, because sometimes I get so excited I don't know what to do, and then I do nothing. So this has been very helpful to have a clear path of how to take action, how to plug in. We've seen there are some places that I think that we don't want to associate with, or some organizations are different, and we want to be careful as Orthodox Christians that we are not compromising our theology, our faith, our church. And so I'm thankful for your leadership. I really don't know. I'm going to be explicitly honest. I don't really know what we should talk about. I really want to give you the floor to kind of lead the conversation.
Wow. The book itself, let's just begin from the book itself. You notice that when I introduced myself, I went back a few generations. That's how I see the world, and that's how I begin the conversation on racism, going back into the 16th century, and how different groups from Europe came to the United States, each with their own different ethos, each with their own different worldview, which we often just talk about liberal and conservative, but there are really four worldviews that come forward from the founding of the country that are still involved in what's going on now, even if they're implicit more than explicit. So one of those views is authoritarian, which came with the Pilgrims to Massachusetts. One of those views was liberal, which came with the Quakers, liberal in the philosophical sense of, I believe you have a conscience and the right to exercise it. So the philosophical meaning of liberal. The conservative group who came to Virginia, often younger sons of nobility who wanted land and to live out the life of the country gentleman here in the United States, And then finally, people willing to explore and try something new, which was everybody who came here, willing to try their life in a new context. So all those threads weave together, and seeing how that initial DNA plays out in the United States today helps us understand how we got here. We can't figure out where to go until we figure out how we got here. So the book is very much focused on that, and focused on keeping an Orthodox point of view as we examine all these things.
Go ahead.
If there is, the book is not very long, actually. It's about 80 pages or so. And if there are one or two takeaways that you really want people to get, maybe the major theme, what would those be in the book?
There's a cognitive dissonance that we experience in being exposed to new ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order for dialogue to take place between people who have been brought up from very different worldviews, we have to, first of all, approach it gently. We have to approach it a bit at a time. So this book is brief. It doesn't, I call them bite-sized books. All my books are brief. I don't want to overwhelm anyone, but to at least be a starting point for dialogue. But the other thing I want people to take away is that if someone has trouble hearing you, who's coming from a long distance away, don't raise your voice and shout more. Just recognize the bravery that it takes to embrace that cognitive dissonance of hearing something that's really, really different from another intelligent human being. So I'm also speaking very much as a psychotherapist, and our brains are designed to question anything that's unfamiliar as unreal. So when we look at the beginning of the coronavirus, that seemed really unreal. You can't see it, taste it, smell it.
Right.
A completely invisible enemy, and some people think it's a hoax, and some people have gotten really sick and died. I chose to immerse myself in the news enough for it to begin to feel real. If it doesn't feel real to somebody, that's totally understandable, because that causes a complete cognitive dissonance that our world should be disrupted so quickly. So facing a different view on race and identity and reconciliation, it's kind of the same thing.
I think it'd be interesting, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time to talk about it maybe later, but you said there's another book you recommended that you think is also appropriate for what we're dealing with right now. The other one on, yes.
Illuminating Shame, Anger, and Forgiveness. So my study of shame came out of the whole racial dynamics. So the Illuminating Shame is really a sequel to the Race, Identity, and Reconciliation.
Can we explore the theme or sub-themes of that book for a moment?
Yes, so this also came from 3 different talks for the Fellowship of St. Moses the Black, 3 different years. The shame actually was 2002, so it was one of the earliest ones. Illuminating Anger and the talk about forgiveness came later. The talk about forgiveness comes completely from the prodigal son. So it's probably the most biblically based of all of them. The one on anger actually was distilled from my master's thesis when I was getting my counseling degree, where I explored anger management in cognitive behavioral therapy and in the early teachings of the church.
And I know that you're a frequent speaker with the Fellowship of St. Moses Black conferences. Do you engage in other speaking? Do you go to visit churches or organizations to speak?
Rarely, because my duties as a monastic superior, my need to stay faithful to my counseling obligations, many appointments obviously are weekly, and the fact that I'm the vice president of the Fellowship of St. Moses the Black and chairing all the meetings, it really kind of grounds me. So okay. I might do one additional engagement a year.
Okay, I'm going to try to reserve that one additional engagement. I've already been very explicit with people at my church that I want to see if we can make that happen.
Yeah, but I live in Alaska, and you want to visit Alaska, right, Mother Katherine?
Well, I was last there in '94. It's been a minute.
Yeah. See, so I'm gonna jump in line in front of Deacon Adam.
I was there in one of the sunniest, warmest summers that they'd had maybe in 20 years, and when the feast came for St. Herman of Alaska in August, I remember one woman fainting from the heat in the church. It was probably in the 80s.
Oh, see, that's extraordinarily hot for Alaskans.
Yes, it was.
That is. Go ahead.
Your books, based on the way you're talking about your books, you keep talking about encouraging dialogue. Mm-hmm. And can you talk about the importance of dialogue in light of the fact that we live in a soundbite culture, we live in a Twitter phrase culture, and we live in a very polarizing culture in which it's an all or nothing sort of proposition that it seems to me that we're losing the ability to express nuance and mm-hmm. to ask questions and explore and even if somebody doesn't understand, in the media, there are very little chances for them to gain understanding. They're just vilified.
Which is why you're doing this. So in other words, we need to control our own broadcasts and not count on someone else to do it for us in a nuanced way. So group dynamics predicts that the larger the group is, the more polarized it will get.
Okay.
So when Americans were able to have more nuanced discussions 100 years ago, 150 years ago, however far back you want to go, what was the population?
A lot smaller.
Yeah, a lot smaller.
Not 350 million.
And then, you didn't have as many. The technology, of course, gives opportunity for more voices to come into the conversation, but then that means mm-hmm. that each person's turn to speak is smaller, and you end up with these sound bites, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But dialogue is what Orthodox Christianity is about. So I come onto the world scene as a new human being in monologue. That means I'm self-centered. Mm-hmm. The infant doesn't necessarily know that the mother is a separate person. I don't know when we actually learn that mom is a separate person, if that ever fully happens. But the infant clearly doesn't know that mom is a separate person. And so being able to have dialogue means there's I and there's thou, and that you and I don't think differently. That's one of the big challenges for a couple getting married. They marry perhaps 50% the actual person in front of them and 50% the ideal that they've been dreaming of since childhood. And in the second year of marriage, the spouse is trying to kind of reach around this two-dimensional image of the ideal and go, hello, I'm a real person. You're dealing with me. I'm a real person. I'm not just that ideal in your head. So that struggle for dialogue replays in each individual life, and it plays out in society. So the struggle for dialogue is part of what makes us human. The need to recognize that there's someone outside of us who's different from us is part of what makes us human. And the vocation that God gave to Adam in paradise was to unite the disparate aspects of creation that had been differentiated. the physical, the plant, the animal, the human, the angelic, all of those different levels, to bridge all those gaps with dialogue. So dialogue is part of our vocation as human beings given by God from the beginning.
Well, in the continuation of the subject of dialogue, what kind of dialogue do you think would be some of the more healthier dialogue for our Orthodox Christians trying to understand what's happening? I think we have a lot of Orthodox Christians disconnected and want to understand. Mm-hmm. And so what is that dialogue? What should that dialogue look like for us that can have the opportunity to initiate it?
Well, I think you're already taking first steps. So organizing a chapter of the Fellowship of St. Moses the Black, I think the fellowship is a starting point for dialogue, because the Fellowship of St. Moses the Black is both dedicated to the religiously conservative values that the Orthodox Church has, which isn't burdened with the politically conservative values, which include keeping Black people down or denying that there's still a problem. So I would say, first of all, utilize the Fellowship of St. Moses the Black as much as possible, whether it's accessing podcasts that are available on the website from the past, as well as on the YouTube channel, on Ancient Faith Radio. There's a lot of material already out there. We're working on volumes 2 and 3 of Unbroken Circle, which came out in '94. So use those as starting points, because other conservative voices in the African American community don't have the Orthodox perspective. And so they may have to feel that they have to deny that there's still a problem in order to be conservative. Mm-hmm. In the Brotherhood of St. Moses the Black, we can both affirm that there's a lot of work to do. We can affirm that there are some agendas that we don't line up with at all, that we're not a political organization. So, so I would say that use us as a hub for dialogue.
And I would say part of that dialogue is we're hearing a collective, and I would say a consensus from our African American leadership within the Orthodox Church that there is a problem. And then we're hearing from many other people that they say, I don't see it and I'm not aware of it and I don't experience it. And it's like what you said, there's a cognitive dissonance because they're not experiencing it. So it doesn't seem real.
Absolutely. And absolutely. So part of it is that we're looking for incidents. So I looked at an interview between a conservative African American and a liberal white interviewer, where he was asking the interviewer to give him an incidence of racism, but it's not something that you look for incidents. Are either or both of you married?
Yes.
So how can you prove to me that you're married through an incident?
Other than the wedding, right?
Yeah, but people get divorced, so that the wedding doesn't, so proving it through an incident, so your marriage is real. Uh-huh. It's very real, but proving it through pointing to incidents is very difficult, because people in and out of marriage live in the same household, have shared children, a whole lot of things. So proving it by incidents is almost impossible. If I put you in the spot there, it would be ludicrous. Right. But we know that you're married. And we know that it's very real.
And Deacon Adams' experience in marriage is different than my experience in marriage, because we're married to different people. We right? Like that. So.
Oh, it's definitely different.
So, yeah, yours is warmer, mine is colder because of where we live.
Yeah.
But so would it be appropriate to extend that analogy and say that not all experiences of racism are the same?
Absolutely. Not all experiences are the same, and we shouldn't be looking for incidents. There will be some incidents, but that's not the main thing you look for. You have to look at trends that started in history that once set in motion, stay in motion until moved by an opposing force, to bring in that physics analogy.
Okay.
So redlining that I think Deacon Jonathan Rivas talked about. Was that part of that conversation? So redlining.
Well, I can't remember if we talked about it live or on the phone, but we did it. So.
Okay, so
yeah.
So that was when the Great Migration happened of African Americans from the southern states into the north. That was right around when the profession of realtors began, and their job was to protect property values, which meant keeping white people's property values intact by restricting where blacks could live. Studies have now shown that concentrating poverty and concentrating lack of resources just leads to horrible problems, and that outcomes for poor people are better when neighborhoods are designed with mixed financial levels in the same neighborhood, as opposed to concentrating all the poverty in one place. So we still live with the effects of that red line. We still live with the effects of that decades later. It hasn't been opposed. It hasn't been acted on from an outside force. So it doesn't mean that the people who are heirs to it ever signed up for it, agreed to it, or aware of it, but the effects of it are still there. The poor health outcomes for Black people are still there. So Black women are far more likely to die during or after childbirth. Maybe just because of intergenerational trauma and stress. We don't really know why, because an individual Black woman's wealth or education is not a predictor of it. One of the doctors who really spoke up for this herself died after childbirth. She had everything, but she couldn't escape that somehow.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying about redlining. For example, I work outside of the church. I work in the mortgage industry. And I know that redlining is illegal. It's a discriminatory practice that is against the federal laws of the mortgage industry. So there are some people who would say, well, that's not a thing anymore. It has been changed, and that opposing force has been instituted. We've got a law against it. But what I hear you saying is that the effects, the collateral damage of the practice that was there for so long is still wreaking havoc on the lives of the people in those neighborhoods.
Exactly.
And so then by extension, it's not simply enough to change the law and say that issue is over and we have won, but there's a lot more work to do. And I think in history, in American history, it seems like that's most vivid with the Civil War and the freeing of the slaves in the Civil War. Is that right? Like that didn't end the oppression of the African Americans.
The 13th Amendment had the loophole that involuntary servitude was acceptable for prisoners. So immediately what happened was passing, well, not immediately, but eventually what happened was passing laws that criminalized elements of Black life. In other words, criminalizing things that were not violent crimes, like loitering. So where will the former slave get employment? But it's illegal during the daytime to hang out if you're not employed. So that could fill the prisons and essentially reproduce slavery. So it's the effects of things that we're still dealing with, and that requires much more nuanced conversation and much more nuanced thought about how to do things, as opposed to in the 60s. I marched after King was shot. I was in Lincoln Center with my dad watching a jazz concert, and they came out on the stage and announced his shooting just before the concert began. And there was just one gasp that went through the whole audience, and it became a memorial concert. And I remember marching after that. But the goals were much more easily articulated in terms of voting rights or being able to be served in public places and so on. Now it's more nuanced.
I think it's interesting. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I'm contemplating this juxtaposition of incidents versus trends, and it really came to light when you said you've got, the delegalization of slavery after the Civil War, but the trend continues in a different shell or format. This trend of oppression continues. Mm-hmm. And so you looking at the incident of the end of slavery doesn't give us reality.
Exactly. And of course, the narrative that Black men are criminals was used to support the criminalization of nonviolent things like loitering.
And so we still have this trend
Exactly.
that takes away from the individual in front of us.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, we've been talking for about almost 40 minutes. I know your time is precious with your mental health practice. And so so that we don't feel rushed, what are the final thoughts that you want to impart to the audience during this broadcast, so that you have time to kind of flesh that out?
I'm going to make an unabashed plug. So the 2020 Fellowship of St. Moses the Black Conference is scheduled now to be a virtual one because we just don't know what's happening with the virus, and we certainly don't want to be a potential hub of spreading when we're here to heal. So it'll be a virtual conference, first weekend in October. So stay tuned. Fellowship of St. Moses the Black is on Facebook and on YouTube. So stay tuned, sign up. It's a great opportunity that you don't have to travel. Keep dialogue going by speaking to living African Americans, not just getting the information online. Speak to live people. Be curious. In a nutshell, I would say just be curious. A healthy curiosity is the antidote to a lot of things. So a curiosity about someone else's experience without judging, without judging, goes a long, long way to heal. So a lot just has to happen one-on-one. If enough of it happens one-on-one, then it will be like leaven. It will transform society.
If we could finish with a statement that we've talked about a few times this week, but I never know who's listening or watching. And I want to have a dialogue. We're having this on a regular basis because I think it's important. Going back to what you talked about, Father Matthew, about us being in a soundbite environment, a soundbite society, a Twitter-based society, in the sense of that we oversimplify things. There's a lot of confusion over what could appear to many as the oversimplification statement of Black Lives Matter. And people are sadly responding to this statement in various ways because they misunderstand what is trying to be communicated. And Father Paul did a great job of explaining we're definitely not saying other lives don't matter or that Black lives matter more than other people. There's all these misinterpretations, sadly.
It simply means Black lives matter too.
Yes. And so I want, and people, I would prefer to assume good intentions when we're hearing all lives matter. People are misunderstanding the oppression that's happening in the African American communities, and that there is that absence of Black lives matter too. And so I just want to continue to remind people of what that statement is really saying, and that I've seen a number of our African-American clergy, especially Orthodox clergy, saying that statement does not mean that we are affiliated with or support or involved with the organization of the same name, which has gone in a different direction with a lot of what it believes and what it's proclaiming. And even though some of us might see that as a hijacking of the statement, this dialogue helps us stay behind the statement that Black Lives Matter too.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's been a lot happening. The trends of our history suggest they don't.
Exactly.
And that's what we're up against.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything else you want to say on that before we conclude? Because we have a lot of this, right? Current events right now are kind of all over the place. So is that satisfactory, or do you have anything? Feel free to add to that if you need to.
I don't.
Okay. All right.
If I can add an anecdote, Deacon Adam, you did the interview with Father Paul Abernathy on Monday. And I spoke with somebody yesterday who said that they watched the interview maybe Wednesday or Thursday morning, and they were so struck by the way Father Paul articulated the issues that this person went to confession. And I thought that was a very beautiful thing, that they watched, as you said, Mother Katherine, with curiosity and coupled that with humility, so that they were open to rooting out of their heart any sort of hateful or discriminatory thoughts. That for a while, they said for a while, I just denied it. But then after listening to Father Paul, I immediately went to confession. And I would hope that many people would watch with the same humility, would listen with the same humility and curiosity.
Beautiful.
So Deacon Adam, kudos to you and Father Paul. And I want to thank you. I haven't been involved in all of these interviews this week, but I want to thank you for the programming that you put together, so that we can have an opportunity to listen and to be educated.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For those who don't know me that well, I work so hard at this because I'm so bad at it. So I have to work extra hard. So interviewing really helps me practice listening. I value mental health therapy, Mother Katherine, so I'm thankful for that. And there's as much going on there with you listening as there is the other person talking. And so if for those of you who are not familiar with the value of that, so I've been thankful to sit here and listen to you speak today, and to all of our guests this week who have been speaking, beginning with Father Paul, and giving all of you a platform to speak, and us being curious in what you have to say. So thank you so much. And I hope everyone, I hope that we run out of bandwidth for the conference in October, because so many people are tuned in. I unequivocally will tell you, I went to my first conference last fall, and it's the best Orthodox conference I've ever been to of anything. It just hands down. And I called people all weekend telling them, you have to go next year. This is the best Orthodox conference I've ever been to.
I was one of those people. That's a true statement. He was calling everybody.
Yeah. So I'm so thankful for all of the work. We've posted links in the comment section for those who are watching and haven't seen it. There are 2 links in the comment section for the books. And the first one being Race, Identity, and Reconciliation. We're doing, for those who've joined us later, we're doing a book study at my church. Father Matthew, you're working on getting one started at your church. And then the second follow-up book there that you're holding in your left hand, Illuminating Shame, Anger, and Forgiveness. And I think you said that's a follow-up.
Yeah.
Correct? Yes. And so both of those are available on Amazon. And I'm looking forward to going through those with my fellow parishioners. And I think that covers everything. Father Matthew?
Thank you so much, Mother Catherine, for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And we wish you and your whole community a blessed feast of Pentecost.
Well, to you and yours as well.
For those who are interested about continuing this conversation, right here on Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, we have Father Turbo Quall scheduled, who is the Dean of Chapters for the Fellowship of St. Moses the Black. At this point, that will conclude our conversations, a specific conversation on this topic, but I'm open to anyone else that wants to join our platform and continue that discussion. That's the last thing I have scheduled this time. And what we're going to be focusing on in that interview, not that it's the end of the dialogue, that Father Turbo will be sharing some pragmatic steps on how to continue this dialogue in our parishes and in our communities. And so he's going to be sharing what chapters look like, what that means, how to start one, and now how to take this into our communities offline in a good way, and start having those actions. So that's our schedule for next week on Tuesday. And if you're interested in, I care, but I don't know what to do, Tuesday's broadcast is going to break down those baby steps.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Mother Catherine. Thank you, Father Matthew. And until next week.